Hey, everybody. I hope you're doing well today. Let's take a look at measuring inflation and how it is done. It's super fascinating. It's so simple, really. And it makes so much sense. People think the inflation rate is a super complicated thing. No, it's just basically a basket of goods that all of us, the average person in every country would have in their house. They add up all the prices. They call that a base year. That's the beginning. And then next year they add up all the prices of all those same goods and they say, hey, what happened? Did the prices go up? Yeah, they went up by 1%. Oh, okay. Well, then there's 1% inflation in the country. All right, but let's take a look at it a little bit more closely. But that's how it's done. It's really pretty straightforward. So here's the technical definition. Inflation, of course, is defined as a persistent increase in the average price level in the economy, usually, almost always, measured through the calculation of a consumer price index, CPI, consumer price index. That is an index, which is a collection of different things, right? Of prices, different prices of consumer goods. Super easy, right? Consumer price index is the most widely used statistic to measure inflation, and it's known as the consumer price index or CPI. In some countries, they refer to it as the retail price index, which is the same thing. The retail prices of things, put in an index, come up with an average or a number based on all the adding up of all of those prices, and you're good, and you come up with your index. All right. So it's actually calculated differently around the world, but the central idea is the same. Here's what happens. A central government or some sort of agency of any government chooses a representative, quote, basket of consumer goods and services and measure how the price of this basket changes over time. It's super easy. You find 100 things that everybody pretty much spends money on every year, and then you throw it in a basket, and then you add up the prices of your basket, and that's the value of your basket. And in year one, you just call it, you add them up, and it adds up to 100. Great. Then the next year, you add up all of those prices of the same goods, and you find out that the price is 102 or 2% higher. Guess what? Your inflation rate for that year is 2%. Or, so you have inflation of 2%. Or you add them all up, and all of a sudden you find out that it only costs $98. Whoa, so you have deflation, which means that that the prices of average price level of all things is going down. Okay, so in a really simple way, you take that basket. If prices increase, the average price level has risen, you have inflation. If prices decrease, the average price level has dropped, and that equals deflation. If you have price level increases, but not as much as the year before, you have the fancy thing of disinflation, which is that it is inflating. I always like to think of inflation as a balloon, right? You put 100 things in a balloon and you measure it, and it has this much air. And then the next year, you take those same 100 things and you measure the prices, and there's 2% more. So guess what? The balloon inflates a little bit. Then the next year, you find out that you add them up, and it ends up being 103, but that's not 2% more, that's roughly 1% more. And so there's still, the balloon got bigger, right? But not as much as it did the year before, because it only went up by 1%. So you have disinflation of the balloon or of prices. So it's impossible to devise a measure of inflation that includes all goods and services. All right, so we're going to take a look at it on the next slide of a typical basket of goods, right? And you'll be able to see more clearly what it is and how it's weighted. It's pretty straightforward. It's a list of things from the United Kingdom, and it could be used for pretty much any developed nation or industrialized nation. So here's the process of measuring inflation. In each country, a list of typical goods and services consumed by the average household is compiled. These items are grouped into different categories. The prices of these items are measured each month to calculate the change in the price of the basket. A change in the price of the basket is reflected in the measure and measured in the measure called the consumer price index. So an important point here is some of the goods and services consumed are far more important than others because they take up a larger share of the consumer income. Well, you're going to see this in a second. It'll make sense. Thus, the categories are given. Thus, the categories are given a weight in the index to reflect their importance in the average consumer's income. Consumer's income. Okay, so it helps the best to take a look at it, and here we go. Check out the table of the different categories in the United Kingdom's consumer price index And there's some examples in here as well. Okay, so basically just look at the broad categories: food and non-alcoholic beverages, alcohol and tobacco, clothing and footwear, housing and household goods. I told you it's really kind of funny. It's really simple things, right? Furniture and household goods. This is carpets and other floor coverings. Health, medical products, appliances, equipment, outpatient services, hospital services. Transportation is another category. New and secondhand cars, motorcycles and bicycles, spare parts and accessories, fuels and lubricants, vehicle. I mean, these are things that you buy, that people buy every day. Passenger transport by rail, road, and air, right? Money spent on transport. Money spent on communication, postal services, telephone and telefax, equipment, mobile phone charges, internet subscriptions. And then there's recreation and culture, audiovisual equipment, related products, data processing, recording data, repair of audiovisual stuff, games, toys, hobbies. Look at this is all stuff you would find in most people's homes, of course, right? And then the last thing here is education, private school fees, evening classes, university tuition fees. Okay, and you'll see that each one of these categories is weighted differently. So transport is something that takes up a larger part of people's income, and therefore it has, I think, yeah, the highest weight here of 16.4. Then housing and household goods, 12.9. Oh, I forgot. Look, recreation and culture, kind of interesting in the UK. 15%, right? Because ultimately it's adding up to a percentage. And 10.8% for food and non-alcoholic beverages. Alcohol and tobacco, only 4%. Clothing and footwear, 5%. So if you took any one of these things and the price level, say, goes up for clothing and footwear, well, that's not going to have a big as impact on the consumer price index as, say, an increase in the price of air tickets or in cars or in parts, because that would have a multiplier of 6.4, or it makes up 16.4%, not a multiplier, 16.4% of the computer price, consumer price index. Okay, so this just gives you an idea, right, of what happens in most industrialized nations and how this little calculation is done on inflation. I think it's really interesting, and most students think that it's really complicated. And you're like, oh, what? Really? They add up how much it costs to buy, I don't know, a newspaper, magazines, stationery, package, holidays. I mean, come on, right? Well, yes, of course they do, because these are the things that people spend their money on, and therefore these are the things that should be counted up to see, right, if indeed price levels have gone up. And this information is really powerful information in the news world, right? Inflation rates are huge because they affect people's behavior. And ask your parents about it. Ask any adult who's working about inflation and the rising of prices and how it's reflected in their income or not. They know. They definitely know. All right, my friends, I hope you found this helpful. We'll talk to you in a bit.